Hey there, this is Chris Metzler, one of the programmers with SF Indie Fest. Welcome. As you might know, we've been kind of bringing some of the most interesting, cool, and unusual films from around the world for the past 26 years to the Bay Area. We ran across this really special documentary, Modernism Inc., that you just had a chance to see. And we're lucky enough to have filmmaker Jason Cohn here. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, most definitely, and as alumni of the festival with First Angry Man a few years ago, it's kind of exciting to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great festival.
So maybe a good place to start is what was it that interested you in this story, and how did you kind of start kind of creating the building blocks for telling it?
I've become kind of a design geek over the years. It started, as you know, I made a film about a decade ago about the designers Charles and Ray Eames, and I became interested at that point in this period of American design history. It's called the Eames era often, or mid-century modern period, but it's really kind of the golden age of American design and architecture, but really, product design, furniture design, interior design, graphic design. It's just a really rich period that we keep coming back to. It's like it never really completely goes out of style. Like postmodernism happens, and for a moment, all of that sort of mid-century modern stuff got washed away, but then like within a couple of years, it's just back. And my theory for that is that it was a period when it sort of swept away all of the old criteria for what we considered to be good design or good architecture, and established a new set of criteria for what's good. And we haven't really changed much in our thinking since then. I mean, it's really, those criteria are really, really excellent criteria, and they still work. And so, yeah, I've just become, kind of geeky about it. And through that film, I was introduced to the son of Elliot Noyes, because there was a relationship between Charles Eames and Elliot Noyes. If you've seen the film, you know about it. And the Noyes family really liked the Eames film, and they asked me if I would be interested in doing something similar about their dad. And I didn't know much more about him than that. He had a relationship with the Eameses, and that Charles really, really respected him. I knew that Charles didn't. There weren't a lot of people that Charles Eames would go to for advice on design problems, and the two of them were really, Eero Saarinen and Elliot Noyes, and that was enough of a recommendation for me to want to sort of pursue it. So I started researching it, and I found that there were some things that were super interesting about his life. The main thing being that I felt that his career kind of tracked the entire history of post-war American modernism, the sort of introduction of European modernist ideas into the American context, and then the sort of absorption of those ideas into corporate America, and how modernism kind of got, you could maybe say, co-opted or corrupted by corporate power. And then sort of the backlash against that starts to happen in the late 60s and the 70s. It was all kind of encapsulated in Elliot Noyes' story, and I felt that was, justified a film about the guy.
I imagine many are wondering sometimes, as like a filmmaker, when you're telling this kind of very historical based, sort of filmmaking, like what's your kind of approach for kind of like finding archival materials and kind of weaving this story together?
Well, there's no generic approach, right? Every project is different. The Eames office, for example, they were incredible documenters. They made a bunch of their own films. They photographed everything. Charles Eames was famous for walking around with a camera, and he felt that he couldn't really see something, a design. Let's say he was working on a chair. He couldn't really see that chair until he had photographed it from a million different angles, and then he would see the chair in its parts, by looking at the photograph. So with the Eames office, I had a collection that was held at the Library of Congress of 500,000 photographs. And so the problem with that one was, how do you manage the insane excess of materials? It was sort of just an embarrassment of riches. And the problem was really, how do you, find the needles in the haystack? With this one, it was a little bit more difficult because Elliot Noyes was less of a product designer and more of like a conceptual designer in a way. He's like a meta designer. What he was designing really was design programs. He did do some really famous industrial design, like the Selectric typewriter is one of the most famous pieces of industrial design. But that wasn't sort of primarily what he worked on. He worked on buildings, and then he was more this kind of Leonard Bernstein type of character who was sort of conducting an orchestra of other designers and having them try to understand the big picture of the symphony. So visually, it was a little bit harder work, really, to find the materials, but there was a lot of stuff in the IBM archive. The IBM people were really super helpful. And the Noyes archive itself, which was kind of in the process of transitioning towards Harvard, where it's going to be archived from now on, was in a little bit of disarray. But there was still a lot of great material there, and I had the help of a guy named Gordon Bruce, who's in the film, who wrote a biography. He was a former Noyes office designer, and he had written a book about it. So he had already kind of gone through and selected, some of what he considered were the most important documents and images and stuff like that. And so he had already done a lot of pre-selection for me, and that really helped.
If you'd had a chance to ask a question to Elliot, is there one that, I guess, in making the film, that you wish that you could have some insight on, or now that the film is finished, is there something that you would have been curious to ask?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. There is something, and I asked it of a million people, and nobody was able to answer the question. He's the only one who could have, and that is, I think the film sort of conveys this idea, tries to anyway, that he was working at a time when the ideals of modernism were transitioning in America, and he, played an important role in terms of introducing the European notions of modernism through his work at the Museum of Modern Art, and then his writing for Consumer Reports, and then, of course, later through his corporate work. But he had a very kind of pure Bauhaus notion of what design should, how it should work and how it should be done. And what happened in the American context is that it kind of got a little bit perverted, first by, I guess, sort of a combination of popular taste and also, sort of the venality of corporations, who are always trying to like make more money. And the best way to make money, if you're a corporation that sells, let's say toasters, is to change the style every couple of years, so that people always want the latest one, even if the one that they had sitting on their kitchen countertop worked perfectly well, but now it's in like new colors and has like some new feature. And you're always trying to provoke people to want to throw away their perfectly good old thing and get a new one. Well, he didn't really like that. So I guess my question is, did his transition towards working as a design director for companies like IBM and Westinghouse and Mobil Oil, did any of that have to do with the fact that he felt that sort of consumer design, the taste of consumers, was changing in a direction that he didn't really want to pander to, and that he felt that maybe it would be more satisfying to work directly with people like Tom Watson, where he could influence things at a really high level and not be, kind of beholden to popular tastes that were changing every 5 minutes. I just felt like he didn't, my sense is that he didn't want to play that game. And being like a meta designer, designing programs for Mobil Oil, for Westinghouse, for Cummins Engines, for Pan Am, that allowed him to sort of play at a different scale and not have to be, worried about what, some consumer in, Hoboken thought about stuff.
Right. That's an interesting one to kind of ruminate on. And as we wrap up, is there anything like, that kind of surprised you during the making of it? Obviously, based on the circumstances of how you approached the film, there was a lot of discovery and research going on. But yeah, was there anything that like made you kind of step back and take notice at some point in time in the film that you just didn't really expect?
Well, I thought that the family relationship I thought was really interesting. I guess it was, in some ways, it was a portrait of a very typical mid-century American, white suburban family with the hardworking dad and the, mostly stay-at-home mom. But I feel like they were really, in some ways they were very typical, but in other ways they were really special, just in terms of the degree to which art and music and sort of culture was integral to everything in their home, the way they just kind of wove everything into everything that they did. And it created, I mean, I can't really focus on it too much in the film, but I think you get a sense of it from the kids that we interviewed, that they all turned out to be really, artistic, creative people. So I don't know, I guess that's something that really stuck with me.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks again for making the film, Jason. For those that want to kind of follow the film's story more, or even kind of check out some of your earlier films, what's the best place to do that?
I guess our production company website, which is breadandbutterfilms.com, is a good place to start. And the film is being distributed now by First Run Features in New York, and it will be available on, Amazon and iTunes and, Canopy and all of those things.
Well, very cool. Everybody get the word out and spread out. And thanks again for making a cool film, Jason.
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me in the festival, and thanks for making the time to do this.
Most definitely. Thanks again.
All right, man.